HTML and CSS prior to this, they were just like static tools to visualize things on screen. HTML to add content, and CSS to apply styles to that content so you can visually perceive it on the screen. Those are very simple tools, of a static nature. JavaScript is actual browser programming language, something you can use on top of HTML to add more dynamicness to your web page. So like this is actually the term app comes from using it has some more dynamic nature, it has JavaScript inside. Usually HTML and CSS are just plain web pages. There's nothing special about it. It's fixed. It's same for everybody else. With JavaScript, you can add different things to make it more dynamic. So in JavaScript lesson MD, first things first, they are added in JavaScript is created in files ending with .js. Same with CSS, HTML. So in a similar way as CSS, you can create it in .js files and use, instead of link that we use for adding CSS to HTML, we can use a script HTML element with a source attribute and link to our JavaScript file. Pretty much it. You can add directly JavaScript inside the script tag, so not in an external file, by directly putting it some JavaScript code inside the script element, inside of the head element. Again, remember, head element is for those meta hidden things like styles, title for the tab, JavaScript, and so on. So the way we are gonna do JavaScript, interestingly, is not right away inside of the files itself, but we are gonna do it inside of the console in the browser. So if you click inspect, remember that before we have this element tab where we can see all the HTML elements on the page, we can style the CSS directly here. Then also we have a console tab, where we can do some JavaScript inside. So JavaScript is just bunch of, like the syntax is bunch of words and some symbols we can type in to produce some sort of functionality. That's pretty much it. Pretty much it, but it's not necessarily too crazy. We need to learn what the syntax of some of those things is, and we can very quickly see it in action. So first thing about JavaScript is the type of values. So we have strings. This is just like words, letters, and they are usually started with the double quote or single quote or even the tick. And you can put some text in here, This is a string. So basically this is the type of value called a string. For example, if you have I am, see that it doesn't work, like this is wrong, because you cannot put, basically JavaScript thinks this is a closing string quote, but you are actually using it to separate I and M. Actually the word is I'm. But anyways, if you want to do that, you need to use a different quote. So if you want to do this, this is correct, right? Or here you can add I am or I and then double quote am. So I like the ticks because they provide you with this templating language. You can use anything inside. You can't make a mistake in that way. So the second, so we have a string, which is some character word for a sentence. And then we have numbers. Numbers can be 25 and they don't need any quotes. Or it can be a decimal point or the scientific notation, which is this. So 1E4 is basically 10,000. It adds 4 zeros, right? You can add a minus. It can be a minus 10,000, minus 25, and so on. Those are all numbers. Then you have a Boolean. It's basically just true or false. Right? Something is either true or it's false. So it's a Boolean. That's a third type of value. Then we have undefined and null. Undefined is basically something is not defined. Null is it something like doesn't exist, or it's null. It doesn't have any value. And this is undefined. So these are kind of similar. You will see throughout the code. It's basically we will need to check if something is undefined. That means that something doesn't exist. So we can act accordingly in the code. So again, we have strings, numbers, decimal points, very intuitive. True or false is just Boolean, something is either true or it's not. And then undefined and null. Those are simple values. Then we have complex values, and those are two more, just two more. It's not nothing crazy. So there's a list. It's called an array, and you can see in the browser console they show it as a list. Like this is an item 1, item 2, item 3. So in array, so it starts with an angle bracket and ends with an angle bracket, closing angle bracket. This is an empty array, and inside we can put anything. We can put a number, we can put a string, we can put another nested array. So these are all, we can put anything we want inside an array as an array item. It's basically a list of values. Basically, that's pretty much it. We're not gonna it's not hard, right? You have a string, you have a number, you have a boolean, and then you have a list, some items inside. An item can be anything you want. And then we have an object. Object is basically starts with a curly bracket, ends with a curly bracket, closing curly bracket, and inside we have key values. So it's basically property and then some value inside, and then another property and then another value inside. And then we can have a property 2, and then the value of that property is a list. And inside that list we have number 1, we have another, as we said, nested list. We can have anything, right? So basically object is just like a bucket where we put a bunch of different values. It's like an encapsulation. It encapsulates a bunch of values within a bucket, like it's a one object, right? It's an object with keys and values. The key is named a property. Usually it's a property and a value, or usually people say key values. So it's a property or a key and then a value. Property has to be a string, and then the value can be anything. It can be a number, it can be another object, it can be a list, the value can be undefined or null, it can be anything you want. So essentially we have strings, we have numbers, we have boolean, undefined, null, we have lists, and any item in the list can be anything, and then we have objects like buckets of some data with the properties and values, where property needs to be a string and value can be anything you want. Things like this and numbers like this, that doesn't mean much. Like we wrote it once, but we can't reuse it, right? So variables come in handy. Variables are just like containers where you store a value and you can reuse that value inside of that variable wherever you want. So for example, the syntax is const and let. Const is, for example, age equals 25. And now I can use this variable. I can say age plus 10 equals 35, right? Because the value stored in age is 25. And if I add 10 to it, it's now 35. So basically it's just a variable is just like a placeholder for a value inside, and we can reuse it anywhere we want in the code. This is like very important. But const is reused when the variable we defined is a constant, so it's never gonna change. So if we try to change its value to something different, it's gonna give us an error. But if you say age 1 equals 25, so age 1 is 25. But if you now want to change the value later after we defined it, if you want to change the value, we can, without adding another let, because we already defined it. Here we can just write 24 and then age 25, age 1 is 24. So basically const is when you want to define a variable that's never going to change. Let is when you want to define a variable that's going to change somewhere in the code after we defined it initially. Number 1 equals 25. We can have number 2 equals 30. And then we can have a result const result equals number 1 plus number 2, and the result is going to be 55. So basically we're just using variables as placeholders for values they hold inside, and we can do some math operations with them, do anything we want with them. And so we basically here the result from summing number 1 and number 2, the result is stored within a third variable called result. So our result variable holds the value 55.
So next thing we are going to talk about functions or methods.
So functions are reusable blocks of code. Like you want to do something. For example, let's say I want to make a pie. I want to bake a pie. So the only thing I need is what ingredients do I want to use. Is it a cherry pie? Is it a apple pie? Whatever it is. The process of making that pie is the same, just with different inputs, different ingredients, right? Or I want to make a calculator. So the process of summing two numbers is the same, but which type of numbers, I just need an input. So I'm not going to make, for every single calculation I have to make, I'm not going to buy a different calculator. I'm going to use the same calculator, just put different values. So for example, if I say function sum, this is how we define a function. So we use a function keyword, then the name of the function, then the arguments in the function, and that function can or doesn't have to return some value. So for example, we say num1 plus num2, and calling a function, we call it just opening the brackets and closing the brackets, but we need to put some values inside. So basically, again, this number 1 or number 2 or whatever the name is for this argument, this is like variables that we will insert later. So it's 1 and 2. So these are num1, num2, and it's num1 plus num2. So inside it takes 1 and 2 and sums it up and returns it. So this returns a value. So if I want to store that value somewhere because the function returns a value, I can say result 1, sum 1 and 2. Ah, we already defined it. Oh, okay, I need to refresh my screen, so give me a second. So we have this. And if I say in the result, now we have result. It's 3, sum 1 and 2, because the function sum returned some value. Function doesn't have to return a value. So if you just wanna, so by the way, you can use a console.log. So if you wanna log something to the console, for example, it just logs a line into the console, whatever it is. So for example, we can say function sum2, it's like number 1 and number 2, and it doesn't return anything. It just console logs n1 plus n2, console logs the value. So if I say sum2, 1 and 2, it will console log 3. It's not gonna return anything, mind you. So if you store result 2, store here the whatever, it's gonna console log 3, but if it go into result 2, it's undefined. It didn't return anything. Function didn't return anything, just console logged something, so it has nothing to return. So the function can either return something or just do something inside the function, but not return anything. Pretty much that's it. Another way of which I often use of defining a function is storing it within a variable. So we can say something. So this is just a variable name, and here we open a bracket, same as above, and we say number 1, number 2, and we use this arrow function. So it's equals and then greater than sign, and then these angle brackets. Again, similar to the function, is just basically this part we add the arrow function. Here we remove the function keyword and we store it in a variable. So here we can also do return n1 plus or times n2, whatever the math we want to do. But the sum, okay, wait, sorry. So I'm gonna say multiply n1, n2, and basically this is our function. So if I say multiply 2 and 4, it's gonna give me 12. By the way, a shorter way of doing this is, for example, I can say N1, N2, and if you only have one line of code in your function, and the function only returns something and it's a one line of code, you can just do it like this, N1 times N2. And basically this is it. You don't need the opening and closing curly bracket. You don't need the return keyword. You can just straight do this. It's much cleaner, looks much nicer. So if you do this, it's going to give us 15. That's pretty much for function.
So the next thing is conditionals. So it's basically conditions are used to execute some code based on a condition. So if some condition is true, the code is executed, otherwise it's not.
So for example, here, as in example left, we have a person, and it's the value of that variable is an object. And the name is gonna be John, age is gonna be 26, the hair is gonna be blue. So this is our John. And by the way, to access values of the properties within an object, we can use it dot notation, so age, or using this, age. And usually the angle brackets are used when the value, the property name is not something we explicitly like type age, but it's stored somewhere in a variable. So like a property is age. So if we store the name of the property we want to access in a different variable, then we can use person, angle brackets, property, and it gives us age. But if we know exactly what we want to access like this, we just type explicitly age, dot age. So the conditionals are if, else, if, and else. So basically if, and then you open a bracket and say if person dot age is larger than 30, then curly brackets execute something, console log can drive. Do any kind of code inside, doesn't matter. And then you can say else if you have another specific condition, you can say if person age equals 25 or equals 18, you can say console log can learn to drive, whatever. And then else, if none of these above pass, some code gets executed here. Whatever, it doesn't matter. So if I call this, because the age is 26, so it's still lower than this condition doesn't pass. And then else if the age equals, this is the sign for comparing something if it's equal to something, so 3 equal signs. Person that age equals to 18, it doesn't equal to 18, so this also doesn't pass, so this is not called, this code inside. And then else is just like this is what it falls back to, like at the end. But you don't need to do if else, you can just do if something is something and then below another independent if you want to, and so on. So if you change person age equals, so if you now update the property of that object and age equals 31, and we call again the same flow, it says it can drive because now the person age is updated. This is about how we access the property and change its value. So person age is now 31 and the condition passed. The person age is, yes, it is bigger than 30, so the can drive, that block of code was executed and we console log can drive. So those are conditionals. And then, yeah, another thing about conditionals is you have this rules. So you have the operators you can use. This is an AND operator, this is the OR operator, this is the equals operator. So basically, let me refresh quickly. Okay, so we have a person object, and let's say that, for example, a condition, if person dot hair is his hair is brown equals to brown, and person age is bigger or greater or equals to 16, then he can dye his hair. If person hair equals blue or person age is bigger than 20, then he can cut his hair, for example. So you can use these operators, or equals to and. So it's like if this is true and also this is true, then it executes. If this is true or this is true, then this executes here. So these are just the way you can write different conditions.
Now loops. Loops are used whenever you want to loop or go through each item in the list and then do something with that item.
A list. We have a list and it has 3 items inside. These are numbers, so these are our list. If you want to loop through that list, go through each item and then do something with an item, we can use multiple things, one of them being for of loop, which is just, this is the syntax for const number of this list, and then we can, for example, console log each number or do something with each number, whatever. It console logs 1, 2, 3, so it goes through each one and then executes the block inside the for loop. You can also have a while loop. Basically, the while loop syntax is this. So basically, what it says is when as long as this is true right here, this condition, it will run the loop. So the important part is in that loop inside, we have to increment or change this variable in some way for this loop not to infinitely run, because it will always run. If this never changes, it's gonna run infinitely, and the tab in the browser is probably gonna freeze. So we just FYI. So we define the number variable here. We said as long as the number is less than equal than 3, then run this block of code inside, and then at the end we increment the number. So if number plus plus just increments the number. So now the number is 5. So if we run number plus plus again, the number is now 6. So basically this increments the number after every loop. So the number keeps incrementing, and once the number is 4, this is no longer true, and then this stops. That's why we see the 1, 2, 3, and that's it. It ends at 3. Next time, after it console logs 3 and it increments, now it's 4, it no longer runs this and it stops there. Class is, we're almost done like with just like generic JavaScript for beginners. Classes are like one very useful, cool piece of functionality where we can, for example, let's say class person. This is how we define a class. Inside class, if you want to pass some arguments to it, like to a similar to a function, we can define. So first, we can define some properties inside the class. Like let's say we have first name, we have a last name, we have age. Let's say these are our properties of our class, and then we have a constructor keyword. And here we can have a first name, last name, and then age, whatever. And you'll see right now what it is. So we can say, so to access these properties within a class, we use this keyword. So you can say this first name equals whatever we passed as a first name. This last name is equals whatever we passed as an argument for last name, and then this age equals whatever we passed for age. And then we can create some functions inside. So if you want to return the full name, it's a function which returns, and by the way, this is a templating language for strings. You use these ticks, and then here is how you implant the variables inside of strings. So you can add whatever text here, but here you can put variables. So it's this last name, and here you can add, I'm gonna remove this. So it's gonna be this first name. So it's gonna return a string, and it's gonna insert a variable in the string, and then a space, normal text space, and then the second variable. So if you do this, with class is like a bucket of functionality, similar to an object, if you remember. So in the object, you have a bunch of key values, so properties and value can be anything. In object, value can also be a function. So same as we have this as a function here. But class is like a syntax-wise cleaner to have, like, to package a bunch of functionality inside. And you can create, this is like a template of a person, right? But now we can make an instance. See this constructor? This is basically when you call a function and pass some arguments to it, the same way is happening here in the constructor, just for this class. So if you want to say John is like a specific person, we use a new keyword and a person class, and then whatever we pass here as arguments, it's basically gonna land here, and we are put it in the first name, last name, and age. So if you say John, and then the last name is, John, and then the last name is Doe, and then 25 years old. Now John, similar to an object, we have access to these properties inside of class. So we have John, first name, John, last name, John, age. And if you want to call a function, because we allow, so this John, so this is creating an instance of a person class with these arguments that we pass here, and we put each of these values inside of these properties so we can access them, and then we define a function for this class, so it makes our life easier. So if you say John, please give me the full name, we call that function, it gives us John Doe. It basically takes this variable and this that we passed and returns a string. So basically this gives us a full name. So this is a class. One thing you're going to use often in your programming career is basically array methods. So by the way, I very much encourage you, but again, don't need to remember all of this at once or in advance. Once you get to a use case you don't know how to solve, you can Google for a solution, and there's probably like a method that solves this. But you can also always type like JavaScript string methods. Like, what methods can you use on a string? Or what JavaScript array methods? And it gives you a bunch of methods you can use on an array to do something with an array, right? To change it in some way, alter it, whatever. So a couple of them that's kind of very useful. So if you have a list, it's an array. So if you say a list.pop and call this method, our list is gonna have 1, 2. We popped the last item, we removed it from the array. And now our list has only 1 and 2 numbers inside. Then you have push. If we say list.push 4, it's gonna push this item into the list in the last place. So now it's gonna be 1, 2, 4. So we can push items into the list to add them to the array, or pop them to remove them, to remove the last child of the array, and so on. Now, two very useful other methods. So we have this list, right? So now if we want to create a list too, but we want to take all the items from list, this first list, and then add 2 to them, to each item. And then that would be our new array stored in list 2. So we would use a map function. So if you say list.map, it goes through every child, and whatever this returns, it's gonna be a child in the new array of the list 2. So you'll see right away. So if you say item plus 2, list 2 is now gonna have 3, 4, 6. So what map does, it goes through each child. So first iteration it's 1, it adds 2, it's number 3. So basically map method returns a new array. So this returns a new array with the values where each value is altered from this array. Something is, done. This value gets transformed, and that's gonna be the insert in this new array, the change value, whatever happens here. So whatever this returns. So again, 1, 2, 4. So it's 1 plus 2, 3, 2 plus 2, 4, 4 plus 2, 6. So list 2, the value stored in list 2 is going to be a new array with altered values. We also have a filter method. So for example, we can say So we can say list3 equals list, and again list is still 1 to 4. So const list3 is going to be a list.filter. So again, similar to the map above, but there's a difference. Anything that passes, anything that returns true for this condition that is returned, this item will stay, and anything that returns false, this item will be removed. And again, this returns a new array that will be stored in the list3. So for example, we say only return items, only keep the items that are greater or equal to 2. So list3 is only going to have 2 and 4 because number 1 is smaller. So for this one, the condition was false. So this one was removed and these two were kept. So list3 now got a new array stored inside of itself where we looped through each item in the list and filtered through all of them and only kept the ones that are greater or equal to 2. That's filter. And by the way, you can connect these methods. So you can say list4 equals list, and then we can say return all items that are bigger or equals to 2. And then after you do that, map through each item and add 2 and add item plus 3, maybe, for example. So what happened is we took this list, we went through each item, we only kept the ones that are bigger or equal to 2, and this returned a new array. Then on that array, we did a map method, and for each item that was left from this returned array here, we added 3 to it. So we only kept 2 and 4, and to 2 we added 3, and to 4 we also added 3, so now it's 5, 7. So list 4 is 5, 7. So basically this is a shorter syntax when you want to connect multiple array methods. So again, this one returns a new array with these 2 items, and then on that array we also do another map method, and then all of this finally returns whatever final value. So we went through array, methods, classes, loops, conditions, how you can write some conditions, how you can write like individual functions, some variables, all that nice stuff. And that's basically pretty much just with that syntax you can do so many different things. So one last thing I want to do is Java, all above is just like a plain JavaScript, what you can do with JavaScript itself. But the HTML and CSS, this is called a document DOM. So basically a document tree with all the HTML elements. It's a tree with a bunch of branches. Each branch is like an HTML element and so on. So called the document object model, DOM. So this entire thing you see here is called DOM. So basically, JavaScript, obviously, because it's a browser and it's a programming language, it has a lot of power. JavaScript gives you a bunch of methods and tools you can use to fetch certain element in HTML and then from JavaScript change its CSS or do something with it, right? So 2 main methods we are going to use, and this is very kind of cool since if you remember IDs and classes, we added to HTML elements so we can select them and style them. We can also select them from JavaScript and do something with it. So if I hover this, I see that my logo has an ID logo. My link has ID logo. So what we can do, the method is called document. So document is basically, you can even hover it here. Like if you type document, it gives you the entire HTML document, right? So the entire document, the HTML document has another method in itself called getElement, but remember getElement, not elements. So it doesn't return multiple elements, just returns 1. That's why I mentioned it in the beginning, ID should be unique, should be 1 element that has this. So if I say logo, and I can even store this in a variable logo. So if I do this and I type logo, it basically returns my logo element. See above, like I can do something with it. So if I just say, I don't know, logo style, I can even change some style to it. So I can say style, I don't know, padding, and then I can add some crazy padding. Look at this. So basically it's logo style padding. I added a bunch of padding from JavaScript, mind you. So I got my element by ID, and then I stored it in a variable and then I just had some influence on it, like I edited its style. You can always Google stuff like how do I edit CSS on my HTML element from JavaScript. Just type in Google like very rational sentences and you will probably very easily get to the solution. And then we can also select stuff based on the class as well. So it's main header, that's my class. And the method I'm gonna use is, so I'm gonna store it in variable called headers. So I can say document get elements, so multiple ones. And you can see here some options by class name, by tag name. So if I say by class name and I add this, so headers, it's gonna return, mind you, an array. It's gonna return an array of HTML elements because there can be multiple elements with the same class. Here, the element by ID returned only one single element because there can only be one with the same unique ID, but for class it returns an array. By the way, I forgot to say, so in the list, if you have a list, if you wanna access one of these items, we can access it by indexes. So each item has index starting from 0. So this is index 0, index 1, index 2. Why it's not index 1, 2, 3, don't ask, just it is what it is. So index 0 gives me element on the place, on the first place. And then list index 1 gives me the second element in the list. List index 2, so 0, 1, 2, so 2 gives me an element in the third place. So headers above gives me an array of HTML elements, but because we only have one header element with this main header class, we can say headers and then access it because it's an array. And then we can do something with it. We can say style, background, color equals yellow. Okay, what do we do? Yeah, there you go. So you can use JavaScript to manipulate HTML and CSS, get some elements, do something with them, change styles, change content within them, and so on. It's very useful, it's very cool. Created some tasks for you. So you have 2 tasks. Task number 1, I want you to continue on with your HTML and CSS task you've done so far. So basically last time you've done it is in CSS, so CSS task, and apply some updates to it. So I want you to get the body HTML element and change background color with the JavaScript. Then I want you to get the button component in the header and add click event listener to it. So basically whenever somebody clicks on a button, you need to console log clicked. So fetch an element in JavaScript, add a click event listener to it, and then every time it's clicked, that function is called, and inside the function called console log. Google how to attach click event listener in JavaScript. It's not hard, but I want you to Google because this is what your job will be as a developer. To be resourceful and find ways to figure out and solve things. So now, the task number 2 is create a function that takes in 2 arguments. One is a string, any string, and second argument is another string, like few characters. So what function should do is take the first argument, remove all characters given in the second argument from the first string and return the result. So for example, function is called the remove. I provide this argument and the second argument is just letter O and it returns this. So it returns removes all characters O from this uppercase or lowercase letters and so on. This one is a bit harder for you to figure out. I'm just gonna tell you that you can replace certain characters with empty strings, like with nothing, to just remove them. And also there's a thing called the regular expression in JavaScript. You provide some code, and it basically any string that code finds within a string, anything that matches it can be removed. So we can match all the second arguments, so all the O's, uppercase or lowercase, and everything it matches, it's gonna be removed, replaced by nothing basically. This one we are probably gonna go together through, but it's a bit more advanced example. And then the second one is create a function that takes in one argument, so basically a string, and it just reverses it, returns a reversed version of it. That's pretty much it. If you think you can handle these, and this one is relatively easier, I'm gonna wait for you.
One eternity later.
Okay, so in each task I provided a solution for all of this. So in task number one, one important thing I want to mention is that anytime you want to, inside of JavaScript, add some JavaScript code, always do it within this function. So window.onload is a function that's called once all the resources gets loaded into your web page, not before. So that means that only once the window is ready, your browser tab, once it's ready to execute JavaScript, only inside of that run your JavaScript code so you don't encounter any bugs. So basically what we've done here, to fetch the body element is document get elements by tag name. So we get body, but because there can be multiple tags, of course, on the page, multiple same HTML elements, it returns an array. So we access it like it's a first item in the array. So we get our body element, we add some styles to it, the background color, and then button, we can add some ID to the button. So we can use get element by ID to fetch our button, and then add a click event handler. So basically, why it's called an event? Anytime someone clicks, this event is triggered. Basically, this function for this event is gonna be called anytime somebody clicks a button. So and then inside we just console log clicked. That's task number one. Task number two is basically a bit harder. This is more experienced thing, but don't feel bad if you didn't solve this or had no clue of solving it. Don't worry about it. You're not gonna encounter this kind of hard type of code in the beginning, especially, but over time, even like the whole goal of this task is for you to try to be more resourceful, even though it's not expected of you, especially in the beginning, to figure out all these things so easily. At the end of the day, you could have easily just Googled how to do this, how to remove a character from a string or something like that in Google, and just try to understand what's going on there and so on. So basically what's happening is, if we have this string and we have multiple letters, a replace method, which is a string method, it takes what you want to replace with what you want to replace. So if you add some space, it's going to replace, but mind you, it only replaced the first A, not the rest of them. And it replaced it with all of these spaces, right? But if we do this, basically replace it with an empty string, it's going to remove that first letter. So now half of the task is done pretty much. But how do we match all the rest of the A's? So if you Google basically string replace method JavaScript, just Google what the method does and what the arguments are. So basically the new value is the second argument, the first value is search value. But the first argument can be, so this is basically a regular expression. It's saying anything within these the lines is gonna be matched, and if you add global or G or E, the global means match it globally in the string, so not just the first one, but any place you find it. So like there's multiple blues, it's gonna find this one, it's gonna match also this one. If you put E, it's gonna be case insensitive, so it's gonna match all of those. So if you basically say match letter A like this, it's gonna replace all the A's it finds. So even if we put, so for example, case insensitive, and we remove the E, it's only gonna replace the ones which are exactly the same. But if it's case insensitive, means it matches lowercase and uppercase ones, it removes all of those. And if we package this in a function, we can literally just say remove this is the value, this is what we want to remove, and like you can just easily just do this value dot replace, but you cannot put a variable here, so that's another problem. So we can say how are you gonna put the variable inside here. This is to remove, this is the second argument, but the first one, this is another problem we have to solve. So what you can do, so one way to, if you want to explicitly put some letters in this regular expression, you can put here if you want to hardcode something. But if there's a variable, you can define a regular expression like this, new reg expression, and then whatever the variable is, so if we say that the value is, if we want to remove, to remove is letter A, and the regular expression is gonna be, we're gonna store it in a variable also. We're gonna say a new regular expression, and we are gonna put this to remove variable, and we are gonna say it's find it globally, and if it's case insensitive. So basically, this is the way you're gonna define regular expression if you have a variable, and of course, if you're hard coding a value, you can just hard code it like this. So these are two ways of defining the regular expression. So now you can add this, and we can say the value is the big uppercase A, and then replace, and this regular expression we just defined above, it will find all the values from the letter A and then replace it with nothing. So it's gonna remove all of those. So this is exactly what we did here. We defined a regular expression so we can pass a variable to remove, because we can add it to the function. So basically in the function above, we can say this, and then we say remove all letter A's from the string, and it returns just this SD. This is a lot, I know, you don't need to understand any of what I just said, but just, this is more to see, if you can to feel the resourcefulness and how you can maybe manage to like put some brain muscles into it, even now in the beginning, when I know this is all too much for you right now. I really know, but so don't worry about it. If you didn't understand a thing or didn't solve it, it's not gonna change your learning process much at the moment. Anyways, the second method is reverse method. So reverse takes a string, does something with it, and returns it reversed, reversed, so the characters in a reverse order. So one of the cool things with another methods on a string, so basically we say this, it's called a split method. So it splits, and if you say split on a, for example, we can split it on an empty space, and it gives us an array, so it basically removes all empty spaces, and everything in between it turns it into an array of these leftover words. But if we say split it on nothing, like an empty string, every character is gonna be an array item. So now a very cool string further is array. So this is an array. This is an array of, so this our string split, and it's an array with each item is a character. It has a method called the reverse, so it's gonna reverse this array. So now our array has a reversed order of items inside the array. And there's another cool now also array method which can join all the items back into the string. So if you say join, and again join like this, it returns, it all brings all the items together into back into a string. And if you say join like this, it adds a space to them. If you say join just as like an empty string as an argument, it just joins everything into a string with no spaces between the characters or array items in this case and whatnot, which you can see exactly what we've done here. So if I say a reverse join, it's gonna return this. It's basically a bunch of methods you use, you research how you can deal with things, start being creative, resourceful, search for it, package it all in one function, and then just call function anytime you want, and it gives you some very cool values, right? That's pretty much it for a JavaScript code. Please don't worry about it. I know these tasks are way more complicated just for you. For me, it's very easy because I know these things exist and so on. But now you sort of know they exist as well, that's exactly the point. You don't need to understand anything now. You probably didn't remember thing from this right now, but at least now you are aware those things exist. And once you need them in the future, you know where to look for. You know that the JavaScript as a tool is capable of things like this. So you can next time search for it, figure it out. Next time after that, you will remember because you already done it. That's it. That's the entire point. This is how you learn. You don't need to remember anything in advance. That's it. Don't worry about it. See you.